So I wanted to do an introduction to the lab portion because the lab portion for 111 is different than it was in 110. Doesn't matter which class of 110 you took. This is a bit different than what we did previously. So I wanted to make sure that we talked about exactly where everything is and what everything is and all of that stuff. So I'm going to share my screen so that we can talk about that. When you're in the course shell, what you'll see when we talk about the lab, the first place that you should be looking is under content. When you go under content, you'll see a lab lecture guide. And so what you'll see in this document that's here is that there's a checklist for each lab, and then there's a lab lecture for each lab. And for reasons I'm going to skip for now, I'm going to go to experiment 3 and open the checklist for that one. And then I'm going to go back and open the lab lecture just to show you that it goes out to YouTube, and there is a lecture that goes with each of these. Now understand that the lab lectures were recorded last term. Their stuff is in a slightly different place than it was then. So I want to talk a little bit about how, like, where things are and how things look now as opposed to then. Okay. One of the things you'll find is that there is this checklist. All of the documents that you need are in this checklist. So if you need the lab manual, it's here. This is the lab manual for this particular experiment. This is what we're going to be using for referencing what needs to be done, how it needs to be done, how to answer these questions. A lot of the details for what you're going to get asked in lab, pre-lab, summary, post-lab is in this paperwork. Okay, so when we talk about the lab manual, this is where you'll find your lab manual from that checklist. Okay, when I talk about the summary, that's going to be here. So your pre-lab / summary, that's here. And what you'll see in your pre-lab activities is this is how you're supposed to set up your lab notebook. There's some preliminary calculations that you'll be asked to do that should have been done before you went to the actual lab, okay? So that you would then be ready to collect data. Now, since you can't go to the lab and collect data, we have collected data for you. That data is either included in this document or it's given to you separately in the checklist. So in this one, it's in the Excel file. So when we open the Excel for experiment 3, you will see that there is a bunch of data that is listed here. And this is all of what you would have collected in the laboratory. Now, it is perfectly fine to print this document and then put it into your lab manual. I will talk about the lab manual actually right now. I should be talking about the lab manual too. So you are expected to keep a lab manual this term. That is different than what we did last term. Information for how to keep your lab manual can be found in the course documents. And you will see the notebook format is here. I have a bunch of information about how to keep your lab notebook. Your lab notebook should be something like an English composition book. It does not require and should not have duplicate copy pages, does not need that. It does not need to be pre-numbered, although that makes me feel weird, but we do the numbering in the book, which is what you'll see in the notebook format. So from an English composition book, you would start your title page. You would have the location of what page that's on. These are all numbered by me. You'll see that this is my table of contents continued. There's a couple of pages for that. This is my experiment 1, which is on page 6, because I have a couple of pages, because I skipped out a couple of the table of contents pages. This is the information about, what I did and how I did it. So I have a brief description of the procedure that I used. I referenced the lab manual because then we know exactly what that procedure was. I have my objective. I list my materials because in the laboratory, I would need to know what those are. So I list the materials that I need. This picture has been glued into, actually taped into this lab notebook. And you can see that I've signed over it and dated it. And the reason I do that is because if it gets taken out, it'll be obvious that it was removed. So there's a reason that we do that. And I talk about that in the lab format portion of this document. Okay, so here's an example of how to keep your lab notebook. A couple of other things. When you make a mistake, 1 line through, 1. It should still be legible. And that's because this is a legal document. So if you write something down, people need to know what you wrote down, because how often have you written something down and that number that you wrote down crossed out is the number you needed? And that's one of the things that we need to be able to keep track of. So every time I make a mistake, I do a single line through it, I initial and I date it. Okay. So that's what we do. An extra space gets X'd out, initial to date it. Okay. And you'll see that there's a signature here. I sign this when I'm done. I didn't sign this one, which was bad, but I should have somebody else in the laboratory that signs off on that for me. That's a legal requirement as well. So that's why that is present there. You, as an online student, do not require that because another person does not have to countersign what you've done. You're doing a process that we call dry labbing. So you record the data as if you were doing it, but you aren't actually doing it. So you don't need to have someone witness that you took it. Okay. So there's that. So that's the lab notebook. So I think I've talked about everything for the lab notebook. Now, like I said, for the Excel portion of this, so your data that you got for experiment 3, you can print this out and this graph too, and then put that into your lab notebook and then initial and date over the printout to show that you have put this in there. That's perfectly fine. There's a lot of data. I don't expect you to write all of that down. All right. The other thing that I will tell you is that we don't always do our calculations outside within our notebooks. We sometimes take the data and record it in there, but we don't necessarily do like these plots and things in that. So that is entirely dependent on where you work and how that is handled. So where I used to work, we had to record all of our data in the lab notebook and then reference where that data was worked up. So what location on my hard drive was that data stored? And then we had to put a time-stamped and dated file into our permanent record. So it depends on where you work, how that happens. Okay, but that's one of the things that you can do for that. So sometimes you'll get data in the Excel sheet, sometimes you'll get it in the summary sheet itself, sometimes it's a freestanding page that says data. Okay, but there will always be data provided to you. If you have problems finding it, let me know. Okay, now that's you will get a summary. There's always a summary sheet. So it tells you what to record in your lab notebook and it asks you a whole bunch of questions. This is your lab summary. And so this is what you're learning from this lab. This is what we want you to understand based on the data that you've been provided. So we're going to ask you, what was the objective? And of course, in my walkthroughs, because every one of these has a walkthrough, I'll tell you where that objective is and where we find the answers to all of these questions. Okay, so that you can see where in the lab manual these are referenced, because that's usually where they are. You'll have to do some calculations. These calculations sometimes are done for you in the Excel sheets that you've been provided, but I need to know that you know how to calculate them, because just because we're using an Excel sheet here doesn't mean you're not going to have to calculate it on a test. So you need to know how to do these calculations. And then once those calculations are done, we're going to start asking you some questions about what does that data mean? What exactly did you learn based on this experiment? Okay, and I will talk about this in each of the walkthroughs as well. Okay, so that's your summary portion, pre-lab and the summary. We have another portion of this, which is called the post-lab. And the post-lab is graded differently. So fix that too. Sorry, I'm sorry. I apologize. It should have worked and I need to fix the fact that it didn't work. So there will be a post lab, and this is a different experiment. So there will be a post lab that goes with each of these that you will then have to fill out as well. This is a similar scenario to what we did in the lab, but not exactly the same. And so you'll have to stretch that knowledge that you gained from the lab to this new scenario. And that should help you to be able to incorporate these ideas to be able to work with them on the next exam. Okay, so that's the purpose of this. All right, so that's your post lab. I know that not all of these labs have the same kind of paperwork. That can be confusing. I know it can. So what I've done is that each one of these has a checklist that goes with it. And again, that's in the lab lecture guide. So each one has a checklist that goes with it to show you exactly what needs to be done. I will add the notebook portion into this so that you can see that it needs to be done as well. All of that needs to be put together into one document. All right. and all of it needs to be in PDF format. So when you turn it in, I should get one PDF file that contains the summary and pre-lab, the post-lab, the Excel, and your lab notebook in that order, okay? So that's what I want to be looking at in that order. So that's how it should come into me. And you get two separate grades that come from this. One is for the lab and one is for the post-lab. So the post-lab is worth more to your grade than your lab portion is. If there is a virtual lab, not all labs have a virtual lab. If there is a virtual lab, that is part of your lab grade. Okay, so you will see that reflected. All right, your paperwork comes into the assignments. You'll see that some of them are 90 points, some of them are 100 points, because that means there's no virtual lab for that. Okay, anytime there is a virtual lab for something, then there will be points deducted from this for that virtual lab. And again, you can see that in your grades as well. All right, so like I said, in your grades, you will see that there are two grades that you get for this. So there's a lab summary and virtual labs. That's one part of this for 100 points. And then you will see the post labs, and that is another portion of this. And it's a different weight for those two things. Okay, so that's what we're talking about there. So hopefully that helps you with that. Now the Alex portion of this for you guys, you'll come into the course documents, Alex, and take your Alex link. And if there is a virtual lab for this, sorry, I went from there. So don't worry about that. That was a glitch because I was in student view. Okay. So this takes me into the Alex shell. I need to do a student view so you can see what you would see as a student. When you come into this, after you've done the tutorial and the initial knowledge check, you can pull up these three horizontal lines, click on assignments. That will take you into your assignment list. If you do view upcoming and then view all, this is everything. You can filter this for the virtual labs, and this will show you the virtual labs that are associated. So again, not everything has a virtual lab. Not everything has an Excel. Not everything is going to have a lab notebook. And so that's what those checklists are for, is to show you exactly what needs to be turned in for that. Okay. And of course, in the assignments section, when you go into turn in your assignments, you'll also see the things that need to be turned in with this. So I will include the notebook here to make sure that you guys know that there needs to be a notebook that comes in with that as well. Okay. But these are all of the documents that are needed. So you have links to those as well. All right. So I think that's everything for the lab. Like I said, there is a lab lecture that goes with each one of these labs. So please make sure that you've referenced that as you may need to, you may not. It's entirely up to you. I walk through the entire thing with you and at least point you to where the answers should be, if not exactly how to do it. Okay. So then I think that's everything about the lab. I'm going to stop talking about that now and go fix some of those problems I just saw. And I will talk to you guys again soon. Thanks.